Super. Okay, well then we are all set, I think. And it is time to welcome our first speaker. We are delighted to have Sarah Marshall, the head of growth for the Vogue Global Network at Condé Nast. Sarah and I first worked together actually when she was at the Wall Street Journal and I was at Storyful. So I've experienced firsthand the magic that she is able to work on audiences. So Sarah, welcome, and it is over to you.
Mine's back to March 2020. I was feeling all SpongeBob. It was my first day working at home as the grim reality of the pandemic was first setting in. So of course we went into national lockdown slightly later, but I was working from home. And why was I nervous? Because everything I was working on, I expected the traffic to go from being very positive to fall off a cliff. Why would anybody want to read Vogue when the world was turning upside down? Why would anybody want to read about trends, or there'll be no red carpet, no real life fashion shows, no celebrities stepping out? And of course, like many of you who are journalists, we rely on a lot of evergreen stories to give us our traffic. Things like best people searching Google for best foundation, best mascara. Would anybody be really searching these if they were living and working and locked down at home? I'm Sarah Marshall, and for the past 3.5 years, I've been working to double the total audience of the Vogue and also double the loyal audience and also the GQs. So I find myself on the 16th of March, 2020, sitting in the room that I'm talking to you from now, and also trying to wrangle 3 children who were at the time all under 4. 11 Vogues. I'm going to say 10 and 11 at various stages, because in China, the primary platform is WeChat. We don't really count the web traffic in the same way, because that's the most important platform for their audience. Now, of course, you look at the different countries here, and you see that China, of course, went into suffered from the pandemic much earlier. So you've got China, and then Italy, the first country to go into national lockdown, and then followed by Spain and France. A little later, it was Mexico, UK, Germany, and then Mexico, Russia, India. So of course, what we wanted to do was really learn from this data set. What could we understand about the way that people in China, audiences in China, had changed their reading behaviors, had changed what they wanted to read, it changed how they wanted to engage when they were locked down at home? What could we then learn from Italy, and so on? To give you a little bit more of the context, there are actually 27 Vogues around the world as of last week, or a couple of weeks ago. So Vogue Singapore launched a couple of weeks ago. In total, we have a collective total web audience of 70 million unique users a month, 3.6 of whom are loyal. In total, it's 60 million Instagram followers, about half of them to the American Vogue, Vogue magazine Instagram account. I'm sure a few of you follow. But 3 million followers to Line, which is a Japanese messaging app. It's very important for our audiences in Japan, in Taiwan, and 1.5 million followers on WeChat, and something like, I think, 11 million on Weibo, which is another platform important to our Chinese audience. The 11 that were owned by what was Condé Nast International were in the process of going through an integration with the US. Initial concerns of traffic falling off a cliff. Actually, the 10 Vogues that I work with are reaching, and all the Vogues are reaching, record audiences. So the red line here is when the pandemic started. So you can see it dipped a little in April, but then it's grown and grown since then. You saw that we were growing already before the pandemic. How did we do that? Now you're all journalists, I think. So you may be familiar, I don't know how this works in other languages, but you may be familiar to the English kind of 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why, that as reporters, we all ask ourselves. So I'm going to take these in a slightly different order and talk to you about how we apply those to kind of really understand our audiences across the Vogue. You all do this, right? You all look at the traffic every day. We've become really good at audience focus of looking at the data. So when I prepared my presentation last week, this is a week view of the different stories that have performed well across the different Vogues. If any of you can read Russian, you know that story is about Coco Chanel, and you can see the different Vogues down the side there. You're probably already thinking, okay, what am I exactly looking at? The blue lines actually show over here on the sources, show the percentage of traffic from Facebook. So this is how we look every day, more than once a day, to see how we can learn from one another based on what people are reading. Now, if you have a paywall or a registration wall, you probably have really pretty good data on exactly who is your audience. But before we could even get to that stage, we really wanted to think about who our audience was. So we had the audience research team, which is a separate team from my audience development team. We had the audience research team. They carried out some research and have come up with 5 personas, essentially. So these are the people who read Vogue. You've got the fashion lovers, the luxury lifestylers, the luxury in-crowd, the lifestyle aspirers, and the guidance seekers. So you've got 5 primary personas or audience segments. So what we've been doing, and we've done, you might have been to one of my workshops with another presentation, I've done it elsewhere as well, running workshops on audience personas and designing news products for individuals. So if you're how do you design a newsletter for fashion lovers? How do you think about a series for the luxury in-crowd? How do you really speak to these people that we know are our audience and they're also our desired audience? So we've done quite a lot of work around that. Now, you probably know when the busy times are from your site. Adam mentioned that we worked together. I was at the Wall Street Journal and we were getting our peak traffic before breakfast. People were waking up and coming to the Wall Street Journal on apps and on the website. Now, let me go back 1 second. And when in the real world, when I used to go out into the real world and I used to get in lifts or elevators, I was arriving at work one morning about this time last year, and the lead audience UX person, the UX researcher, said to me, you know, something really interesting happened yesterday. We had a focus group in last night who are all loyal readers of British Vogue. And they all told us the same thing. They said they love reading Vogue before they go to bed from their phone at night. So we thought, let's look at the data. So what you're looking at here is time along the bottom. So you can see here that about 6, 7 people, readers of British Vogue, this is the domestic flyboy audience, the non-loyal audience. They start to come online. The audience, the site grows in traffic, in sessions through the day, a nice peak around kind of tea time, commute time. And then, of course, as these people are saying, people love to read British Vogue in bed. Well, I don't know whether they're in bed, but before they go to sleep at night to unwind. The loyal audience, the reading behavior looks pretty flat throughout the day until you break it down by platform. Daytime audience, probably a bit more B2B. You've got that desktop daytime audience peaking just after lunch or at a late lunchtime. And this mobile audience, they're coming in the morning, they're coming in at the lunchtime, and then growing in, the site's growing in popularity until about 9, 10 o'clock at night. Its busiest time is between 8 and 10 at night. And when we pull the data for what was remarkable, and you saw how diverse the Vogues are in terms of the different communities of people we're reaching, so people in Russia, Taiwan, Mexico, really kind of perhaps diverse cultures, but we found this was exactly the same. Every single Vogue had a peak in audience in the evening. This was a chart that I showed to the 27, because Norman Lamb, the new editor-in-chief of Singapore, was actually there. The 27 editors-in-chief, they came to London in January. And I did a presentation for the editors-in-chief of the print magazines. And I said, look, this is when audiences are online. What you can find is your loyal audiences, our sites are actually busier from our loyal audiences first thing in the morning when people want to come and read what's happened overnight. Our loyal audiences make up only about 8% of the traffic, but they are more engaged, so that we're getting more sessions from them early in the morning. And every single one of the Vogues, its audience peaks in the evening. The reason I showed them this chart was because these bars represent the stories being published. So my point here was to say, look, we are not publishing very many stories at the peak time when our audiences were online. So I thought that was a really important point to make. And we started to talk about, I was like, think about when you're commissioning the mindset of those people, when they're perhaps in bed, perhaps on the sofa, on their phones, and really kind of let's think about commissioning for you talked about audience first in your introduction. Let's think about the audience first and when they're reading and the mindset they're in. Why people read? Perhaps this is a little bit of an untapped area. So I think probably some of you are perhaps familiar with maybe you have personas, maybe you're familiar with what people are reading. how much work have you done about why people read? And this is an idea that I borrowed from the BBC. So there's a guy called Dimitri Shishkin who was at the BBC World Service. He did a presentation about the needs of the BBC audience, the BBC World Service audience. And the audience research team and I, we were watching this presentation and we were like, that's so interesting. So after 3,000 surveys to loyal Vogue readers around the world and 2,000 surveys to people who love fashion but don't read Vogue, they found out the 6 needs of the audience, the Vogue reader. So update me, they want to be updated. They want to be inspired. They want to be educated. They want to be made more responsible. So this is about sustainability, living better, being better versions of ourselves. They want to be connected. They want to come to events in real life or events like this online and make connections. And they want to be diverted. I'm sure you've come across a print edition of Vogue before and just know that beautiful experience, how it diverts you away from what you're doing before you were reading. We've done 5,000 surveys, or because the audience research team had done so many surveys, they could break it down by country or by market. So for most countries, the primary need of people is to be diverted. Russians, they want to be inspired. We in the UK want to be made better versions of ourselves. We're thinking a lot about sustainability. We also have the secondary and tertiary needs, of course, by market. So how does this translate into stories? So this was a story that we did about Chanel's Autumn Winter 2020 show. And so British Vogue did about 9 stories on this show, but 4 of them I think neatly fit into these categories. The problem that you're trying to solve for the reader, what do you try to help them with? So an update me story is the show report. An inspirational story is telling people about this try now hairstyle that you can do yourself. You can educate people by telling them things that they need to know, or you can divert them with this kind of stories of models, of celebrities. We then layered on the audience data, and we took a data set of every story, every Vogue published for a month, and we looked at it, and we found that 53% of our articles that we produced in that month were update me stories. They were news hits. And only 2% were stories that helped people become more responsible in their lives. So this is white space to me. And I thought, what happens if we produce more of the stories that help people become more responsible? They understand more about how to be more sustainable. Do we grow both our absolute numbers of audience and also grow in engagement and loyalty because we're helping people, we're solving a problem for them? Average readership. And we found that even though more than half of the stories we were producing were those news hits, they had the lowest average readership. So we delivered a report for each of the Vogues and we told them, look, Inspire Me stories do the best on average. So let's think about how we frame a story, how we position a story. Can we change update me story about a store opening into something that really inspires people? So that has been a really big gameplay for us as well. And it's had a really big impact doing that needs study. And here's this example that I showed you a few minutes ago. And this Inspire Me story had 10 times the number of readers of any of the other stories. So just showing how an inspirational story can really appeal to that thing that people need. Now, to what extent can we really tell this? So this caught my eye. I noticed that one of your supporters. The Reuters Digital News Report 2019 came out about this time last year, slightly earlier, and it had this piece of information buried on page 55 of the 156-page report. So it had this concept that it called news moments. Again, it got this from a group of young people. They did a focus group with quite a small group of people, but they found some patterns in the way people are reading. And they described these 4 news moments, which I love the idea of. So you have these dedicated moments where it's like reading a novel. It's like watching a TV, settling down to a good book. It suits evenings and weekends where you're really focused on reading perhaps a long form story. You have those updated moments of when you're preparing for the day. You want those news hits in the morning, those time filler moments, the things that BuzzFeed used to call the board in line people. So that people are trying to do something else, they're on a break and they've got time to fill. And then the intercepted moments, that's the news alerts. It's when a push alert or an email newsletter breaks into your attention and intercepts you because it's pushing some news to you. The predictions piece, little did any of us know what was going to happen in 2020. I wrote a predictions piece for Nieman Journalism Lab, as I do every year. And I broke this down a little bit further of how this concept of news moments spoke to me. And then I married it with the needs, so calling it news needs. So here you see me kind of breaking down what an updated moment is. That it suits mornings, and I started to think about what format do people want to read when they're in that mindset? What platform is this suited to? How do we reach these people? And what need does it solve? Pre-pandemic world, the dedicated news moment might look like this for a girl who's on the train, who's got a 2-hour journey to kill, and she really wants to dive into a long form. The update, it's when you're on your way on the tube, on the metro in the morning, on the bus. The time filler is when you're waiting for your lunch or waiting for something to happen. And the interrupted moment happens at any point in the day. Lockdown starts. You're at home, the updated moment, you're at home, the time filler moment, you're at home, and the interrupted moment, you're at home. The data sets. What could we learn when the lockdowns hit? What you're looking at here is time along the bottom and the different week numbers of the year. This is Spain, their hourly traffic. Spain went into official lockdown in week 12. That was the week the traffic was lowest. Now, by breaking it down week by week, and when we looked at all the Vogues together, what happened was this nice peak we had in the evening, even though the traffic was lower at other times, the evenings were much quieter. The first 2 weeks of lockdown were quieter in the evening. And I think my colleague Alison Lowe at British Vogue sums this up. So she was explaining to people a couple of weeks after the lockdown hit in the UK that the peak had returned to 10 p.m. And for the first few weeks of coronavirus is that it was at lunchtime, but now it's returned to normal. It's a good sign for websites, for lifestyle websites, as it's perhaps an indication that people are returning to their regular behavior and wanting evening inspiration and distraction rather than being glued to the news. I'm sure you can relate to either making the news at that stage as a bunch of journalists or being glued to the news. We found that readers came to Vogue Italia a little bit earlier. Those update me moments in the morning, they were perhaps at home. They perhaps didn't need to commute. So we found that Italy, which went into lockdown in week 10, I think it was, of the year, then their audience started coming very slightly earlier in the subsequent weeks. We found that desktop search grew, particularly in the late afternoon. This is organic search, desktop traffic thick. Spain going into lockdown this week, week 12, and then these dotted weeks, we're getting more traffic in the afternoon and the evening to Vogue Spain's website. Weekends, Vogue Italia, desktop search traffic, you can see it's much higher when everybody's forced to stay at home. They've got their desktops. We also looked at categories. So, of course, fashion is the most important topic for most Vogue, at most points in time for Vogue readers. Here you've got January, you've got February. The fashion category is at its peak because, of course, it's award season and it's also fashion month. All the fashion weeks take place. But during the pandemic, culture and lifestyle overtook fashion as the main category, as the thing people were reading. As the Vogues were forced to obviously pivot what they were writing about, they couldn't write about necessarily celebrities stepping out or red carpet events. They were writing about films, about fashion to watch on Netflix, and they were really talking about the things that people wanted to engage with around like free tours to do, free museums and galleries to visit and things like that online. And then, of course, as lockdowns ease a little, we have fashion returning and culture and lifestyle dropping again. Lockdowns ease. Well, you can see how granular we went with the data with every single Vogue. Let's take Vogue Russia as an example. So we've got February in blue here, good traffic at all times of the day. We've got lower traffic at all times in March, April, and May when the lockdowns were more severe. And it's returned by when we pulled this data midway through June, so the first half of June, it's back. We also looked at things like mobile traffic. It's very consistent through April, May, June. In June, as people started to go out, desktop traffic dropped. Organic search desktop traffic dropped in Russia. And in April, desktop traffic, organic search was much higher, whereas, again, mobile's much more consistent. But as people are at home in lockdown, this is weekend, the hourly search traffic is much higher. So I'm giving you a lot of detail to show you actually that even though we drilled into this, what I find perhaps incredible is that when you look at this chart, you've got February, March, April, May, June. So you've got the blue line. And what do you notice here? Yes, of course, April and May are a little bit lower, but you still have exactly the same patterns of audience behavior. You have people coming in the morning, you have people, the site's growing in popularity through the day, and then in the evening. So I find perhaps amazing about this pandemic and about the impact on audience behaviors, and however much we've tried to drill into it, even though when life used to look like this, which it certainly doesn't for me in London at the moment, and it now looks like this, whichever moment you're in, audience behaviors are remarkably similar. We're still having those, I would argue, I think we're still having those update me moments, those dedicated moments, those interrupted moments, the time filler moments. They just happen to be that we're at home. So I'm very pleased to report that audiences are as big as ever, are growing still, but actually behaviors are remarkably unchanged by a pandemic. So thank you for listening, and particular thanks I should mention to Ari Fukuda, who's the data analyst on my team who pulled all of the data on those many studies and has been working very hard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this presentation, for the insight into the changing needs of the audience and how to marry that information with formats, platforms, and so on. We are now going to take a look at what's happening in the live chat, and for that we have Angela joining us for a little bit to read some of the questions from the audience, and hopefully Sarah will bear with us for a little longer to answer those questions.
Hello, Sarah. How are you? We have some questions from the audience. So we have here a question from Andrea Archip. What do you call an inspirational story? Can you give an example, please?
A bit like that. The example I shared was like the Chanel show catwalk. On the Chanel show catwalk, you just saw these try now hairstyles. So it's like something you could perhaps do yourself. Maybe it's something you can buy, something you can consume, some makeup that you want to try. For us, it's something that really kind of inspires something. And of course, it's a little subjective. So we have to go through, I think we produced about I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. I think it's about 4,600 stories that we have to go through to manually categorize what needs these stories had. So of course it's a little subjective. And we sat all around, we're all speakers of the different languages. So we sat around and we're like, is this an inspire me story or is it an educate me story? So it's a little bit subjective. A good example is as well of how Vogue India, when we told them, look, you're producing loads of these update me stories about the shows that were happening, the kind of Mumbai fashion show, etc. And rather than just doing the straight, this is what happened story, they try and make it more about the reader. These are looks that you could take inspiration from. These are looks that you can try, and making it more about how to inspire the reader. So just reframing those stories.
Thank you, Sarah. And we have time for one more question from Lizzie Young. Lizzie Young says, great presentation. Question for Sarah: how does Vogue organize the service? How does it ensure the sampling is representative of the population?
The best person to answer this is the audience research team that I work alongside. But what we do have is a big community. So they've built something which is basically a community of 100,000 people who are readers of Vogue around the world. And so it's essentially an online community that we can tap into any day and ask them a question, run an idea for a video series by them, or we can do some work around for an advertiser. We could do some research to take it to market and say, this is what the beauty and, this is relevant to the beauty industry. So they've had people, audience members who we know from previous surveys and some data that they absolute kind of beauty obsessives. So that they have been asked to do kind of video diaries and things like that, which we've then showed the data to advertisers, and it's become actually a really important platform in itself. It's called Vision Critical. So the way that we kind of, the technology we use.
So thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your great presentation. And thank you for being here today with all of us. And Vera, back to you.